I kind of want to record that.
It is rare that we have to go twice, but I can hear them off in the distance.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, you notified me.
and I can hear the booms.
Speaker, Sue Reiss
Is that here?
She may have to go in the safe room.
Mine hasn't run yet. My daughter thinks it might actually be for us.
Okay, we want you to be safe.
Well, Kudo Orf hasn't told me yet that I need to go, so I'll stay with you till I'm told officially.
Okay.
I need to be there.
Wow. Okay.
Well, yeah, okay, it's starting now, so I'll be back in a few minutes.
Okay. So you're getting a little of the reality. It's like reality TV. It's really happening in live in real time. And
so scary.
Yeah. It's happened when we were calling people, not in this war, but a previous one, calling people in Israel, and they had to get in their safe room. Okay, I'm going to pause for a minute as we're waiting.
Yep.
Okay, back again. Well,
yeah.
we're all like, well, people were asking how long do you usually have to stay in the safe room?
Officially, they say 10 minutes, but we can hear the
Iron Dome or the
Iron Dome intercepting.
Yeah.
You can hear the booms, and then suddenly it's quiet.
Yeah.
And once it's quiet,
wow.
Basically, so I don't think I've ever.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. 10 minutes.
Thank you for being. Are you okay? Continuing.
Yeah. No. It's,
okay. You'll let us know soon. Well, I'll say a little brief introduction, and then Sue's going to speak for, I think you speak about half an hour, or as long as you want, about your Israel story, and then people can ask questions. Since it's kind of a small group, people could just ask you questions if it, instead of putting in the chat at the end of your talk, and maybe we'll offer Israel. So it's our second in a little mini series of speaking to people or hearing from people directly from Israel during this very difficult time. And I'll just give an acknowledgement that today it's also part of the Global Day of Jewish Learning in connection with the Jewish Federation of Delaware. That at 2:00 they had an introductory Zoom, and it is about my Israel story. We want people to share their Israel stories. So Sue, I know from San Antonio, she's a Landsman because we're both from San Antonio, Texas, and we were in Temple Youth there, the Reformed Temple Bethel, and then she later went to Brown University in Providence, and which is the only state smaller than Delaware, but has more people in Rhode Island, and has a degree in Judaic Studies and Comparative Literature. And we got to once again be together for a semester in college because we came and did I think a semester or a year. And,
one semester.
One semester at the University of Texas.
I was preparing to come to Israel.
Yeah, cooperative house, which was people interested in Zionism in Israel. And in 1978, she made Aliyah and founded a Moshav in 1980. I was among the founders of this Moshav Shorashim, which is affiliated with a conservative or Masorti Jewish movement in Israel. Her 3 children grew up in this community, and she's very active on different committees and volunteer work, and also in leading services at their egalitarian synagogue and leading Shabbat study sessions. In her professional career, she's started as a translator and technical writer, and then went from educational software into instructional design and curriculum development, and will be retiring at the end of the year. She's interested in modern midrash, Israel folk dancing, and keeps busy with her grandkids. So glad you could be here. We'd love to hear your story, as well as what life is like for you and your family right now. Thanks.
Okay. So I'll start. How did I end up in Israel? I think Julie and I are the outliers of people who got Texas reform educations, because most of the people, the education was so superficial that most people could take it or leave it type of thing. But for whatever reason, I connected to my Jewishness. And that was part of the reason I very much wanted to go to the East Coast for college. Ended up at Brown, which had a very vibrant Jewish community. I became very, very involved with it there. Started to learn all the things I never learned in my Reform upbringing. Became active in the Hillel synagogue there. And decided that as part of this journey of connecting with Judaism in a way that I never had growing up, decided that I needed to spend time in Israel. I thought that I was going to go to Israel for a year, learn some Hebrew, get to know the country, and come back to the United States and do a master's.
Please unmute yourself. I think you accidentally.
Okay. As part of the preparation for coming to Israel for the year, I took one semester at University of Texas, which is what Julie referred to, and then made Aliyah after my graduation from Brown. Actually, did make Aliyah. Came to Israel for the year. Spent 6 months in Ulpan. 6 months I worked at the university in the Melton Center for Jewish Education in the Diaspora, doing administrative secretarial stuff, and then started a master's in the Bible department at Hebrew University. And all of this time, while I was in Texas, I became involved with someone who I ended up marrying after our first year in Israel. And he basically said, you have 1 year, and then the Jerusalem Post is not allowed into our house. So I spent that year working really hard to learn Hebrew. I'm also someone who's very connected to theater and literature, and I knew that if I was going to live in Israel, it was important to understand the language well enough to go to theater and to read Hebrew novels in the original and not in translation. So I worked real hard that year, and at the end of the year, we stopped buying the Jerusalem Post, and we would get the Friday paper, and it would take me the whole weekend to read the front page. And then suddenly I could read the whole front section over the weekend, and then suddenly I could read the whole newspaper. Frank and I, as I said, we were married. And after 2 years in Jerusalem, we decided that the life we were living there really wasn't that terribly different than the life we probably would have been leading in the United States. And that wasn't what we came to Israel for. And we started looking for something that we thought would give us a little more meaning. And we ended up finding a Garin that was founding a Moshav Shitufi up in the Galilee. Moshav Shitufi is very much like a kibbutz. It had a communal economy, but there was more privacy and emphasis on family, freestanding homes, and there was no dining hall, no laundry services, etc. So some people joked and said that it was the best of both worlds because you had more autonomy as a family, but the social and communal aspects of kibbutz, and other people said it was the worst of both worlds because you had a general assembly making the rules and telling you what you could and couldn't do, and you still had to do your own laundry. So anyway, it for us was a wonderful fit. The name of the community is Shorshim. It's up, if any of you know Israel geography very well, it's up in the Western Galilee, right outside of Carmiel. We were among the original founders of the community. And the community spent 5 years in a temporary site before the actual site itself was built and we moved. Unfortunately, 2 years after we arrived at Shorshim, Frank enlisted as an Oleh, as a married Oleh, still on the younger side. He was required to do 1 year. He was in a combat, he was in artillery, and he was killed in a training accident. So I found myself as part of the, what in Israel they call the family of bereavement. And there are very, very many families in Israel that have lost fathers, sons, brothers, uncles, cousins. So it's a very widespread, unfortunately. I did remarry to someone who at the time, and someone originally from New York, who made Aliyah and stopped speaking English in the Ben Gurion school of making Aliyah. And he was living at Kibbutz Keturah down in the Arava. And after a lot of long debates, he comes from a family of very stubborn people. But whenever I mention that, he says, "And where do we live?" Because he ended up coming and living at Shorashim instead of me going down and living at Keturah. Been at Shorashim ever since. Shorashim, like many communal settlements in Israel, including quite a few kibbutzim, privatized in the 1990s. And so the communal budget and economy was broken up. Everybody became responsible for their own livelihood and whatnot. But it still remains a very, very supportive community, especially at times like this during the war, bringing everybody together, having low-key social evenings to get people out of the house. We have a couple of psychologists that live there that did volunteer evenings, let people talk about the things that their fears and whatnot. A lot of that going on. And we have a number of evacuees. I don't know how much, from what I've seen, the US press doesn't talk at all about the 150,000 Israelis who've been forced out of their homes over the last month. And so we have a number of them living at Shorashim with other relatives, or we have a small number of rental mobile homes. So we have someone from a kibbutz on the northern border who just rented one. She's a nurse and needs to be close to the hospital where she's working. So anyway, they've rented at Shorashim. We're 21 miles south, no, not 21, 20 kilometers. However many miles that works out to be.
I think you said it was 13 miles.
Yeah, 13 miles south of the Lebanese border. So as of yet, we haven't had to go into the shelters. If things heat up like they did in 2006, we spent a lot of time in shelters during the second Lebanese war. So far, Hezbollah hasn't, I won't say the northern border has been quiet, because unfortunately it hasn't been, but all of the action on the northern border has been within a few miles of the border. They haven't spread further south. So for us right now, things are quiet. I have spent a lot of time I have a daughter here in Netziona and another daughter in Rehovot, right next door. And I've spent a lot of time down here helping them. My one son-in-law has been in and out of army duty over the last few weeks, doing training and daily things. He hasn't yet had to stay. That could change at any moment. My other son-in-law he works for Israel aircraft industry and something that's very related to security. And they had a higher priority than the army, and they couldn't let him out. So he's not drafted at the moment, but or not in the reserve at the moment, but he is working very long hours, including weekends. Let me just back up and give a little more personal background, and then we'll talk a little more about what's happening today. So the community where I live now is about 150 families. And again, we started as a Moshav Shitufi, and another woman and myself set up this business of translation, and then it moved into technical writing. We ended up with a client who had us writing a manual for a platform that did educational software. And we ended up working with them full-time. And when we privatized, I ended up becoming an employee for them. And that's where I've spent most of my career. At one point, the company got bought out, and I went with the new owners, and then they fired all the Israelis. And then in the meantime, my original people had set up a new startup, and I've gone through a series of startups with the same group of people. I feel very fortunate that I can look back on my career as I'm getting prepared to retire and say, you know what? There hasn't been a morning that I've gotten up and said, I really can't stand my job. I don't want to go today. There have been times when it's been a little more pressured, high tech than I've wanted it to be, long hours, but I've enjoyed the work. I've enjoyed the people I work with. I think I'm involved with a product I think is having an impact. I feel pretty lucky. That's that end of it. As Julie mentioned, our community is affiliated with the conservative movement here in Israel. That was something that was very important to me when finding a community, was to find a community where I felt comfortable praying. After 2 years in Jerusalem, where it was a struggle, and I kept thinking, how ironic is this? I come to Israel and find it harder to be the kind of Jew that I want to be than I did in the United States. Like something's wrong with this picture. So the community that we're in is, if any of you have ever had ties to Camp Ramah, it's kind of like living at Camp Ramah in terms of the Jewishness, the type of services that we have and whatnot, the very informal, and the kids are involved and help lead the services. But that's been a big part of the community for me. As Julie also mentioned, I have 3 kids. My son, well, I never dreamed any of my kids would end up in Texas. My son is actually doing a postdoc at Reiss University in Houston, which gives me a lot of opportunities to stay in touch with my Texas relatives, because my son has 2 children and I can't go that long without seeing the grandkids. So we've, in the year that they've been in Texas, we've been there 3 times. They're about to make another trip in a couple of weeks. So that point of view has been great, because I see my aunts and my uncles and my cousins, and who I otherwise, who knows when I would go back to San Antonio. But life has these funny ways of coming full circle, and we do hope that my son and his family will be returning soon to Israel. He started looking for his next position after he finishes at Reiss. We'll see what he finds. Unfortunately, Israel is a very small world when you're in academia and research. There aren't a whole lot of opportunities, and he jokes that he may have to wait for someone to die before he can come back and get a position. What else? So let's talk a little bit about what's going on now. My daughter, whose house I'm at right now, she and her family, she has 2 small children. were visiting us for Simchat Torah. And we woke up on Saturday and hadn't turned on the news. And she started getting messages from the city of Nes Ziona. We all have apps on our phones for telling us when we have to go into shelters, that Nes Ziona had to go into the shelter. Okay, she was up in the Galilee at the time. But that's how, then we turned on the news to see what was going on. And that's when we first heard, and at the, we knew that there was a lot of bombing going on, and that there were some terrorists who had entered a handful of kibbutzim, but it wasn't till later that the whole scope began to become clear. By the time I went to the Hakafot that morning, and by then people were already, some people hadn't even heard that. Not everybody turns on their radio on Shabbat. But it was still really sketchy. By the afternoon, of course, the news started to come out a lot more. Our biggest fear living where I live, one is that the Hezbollah will start to seriously bomb. In the 2006 war, Carmiel was hit about 200 times. And we're just past Carmiel. And now there is a high mountain between us. So for them to actually hit my house, they have to basically aim almost straight up and have it come straight down, because otherwise it won't clear the mountain. Or if it clears the mountain, it's going to hit down below just because of the physics, the angles of projectile motion. But the biggest fear really is we live in an area where the majority of the residents are Arab. Most of the time we have reasonable relations with our neighbors. But there have been times as recently as a year ago when we had a skirmish with the Hamas, that some of the Arab villages around us have caused trouble, burning tires, blocking major roads so that people can't get in and out of their communities. There was someone from our regional council who was lynched in an Arab village. And we go in and out of the Arab villages even since the war started. I wanted to have the latest COVID vaccine before we fly to the States in a few weeks, which we're coming for my grandson's birthday. And Carmiel, the lines, I couldn't get an appointment for a long time, but there's another big clinic in Sakhnin, which is a very large Arab town close to us. I had an appointment, got in right away. They were all very nice to me, had no fears. I wasn't nervous or anything about being there. We grocery shop sometimes in one of the Arab villages. It's a large grocery store there. So things have remained peaceful, but that was, I think, in my neighborhood's biggest concern was that the local Arabs would join in the violence. It turns out that they themselves, a lot of them don't identify at all with the Hamas ideology. And they think that they do more damage to Islam than helping the Palestinian cause. So far it's been quiet. We hope it stays that way. We do have armed guards it's a gated community. All the Moshavim, kibbutzim, etc. in Israel are gated. And there have been 2 guards at the gate around the clock, which is unusual. Everybody has their either their safe room if they're in a newer home, if they're in an older home like us, we don't actually have one in our house. We have to go to nearby shelter. But we have our mattresses set up over there, and we have our little bags ready to race out the door with. Fortunately, it's been quiet and we haven't needed. We do have, of course, a lot of the young fathers that live at the community and children of those of us that have among the older members who are right now in the army and fighting. My next door neighbor's son is in in the engineer corps, and his job is actually blowing up the tunnels. I don't know how his mom sleeps at night. It's a pretty dangerous job. But that's, unfortunately part of the price of living in Israel. I do have I describe him as my nephew's uncle on their father's side. He's a emergency medicine physician in Pittsburgh, and he came over to volunteer. And his wife was understandably very nervous until we all pointed out he landed on the day that was the 5th anniversary of the shooting at Tree of Life in Pittsburgh. So unfortunately, right now, I'm also worried. My son's on a college campus. I have nephews in college. It's not such a rosy situation in the US either. And as I used to always tell them, my parents would be, really nervous about me living in Israel. And I would point out the random shootings that were happening in the United States and say, there is no such thing as a totally safe environment. And you learn to live with the dangers that are around you, because you would never leave your home if you just let it control your life. And I think that's true whether you live in Israel or in the United States or anywhere. You try and be smart. You don't put yourself into places that might be more inclined to be dangerous, but you can't lock yourself away. And so we in Israel have all learned, I've even during this time of suicide bombings, if I needed to go somewhere on a public bus, I went somewhere on a public bus, because you can't stop your life. So that's, in a nutshell, that's my half hour. And ask, I don't know what interests you, so whatever you want to ask is fine.
Hi, Sue. Thank you so much. So I do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So here in the United States, it's always a struggle for me to think about who should I listen to? What news can I trust to be accurate? Do you have any suggestions for that?
In English, I can't really tell you what I would say. I will. For one thing, I meant to say, since you guys are in Delaware, is everyone here is in love with Biden. The fact that he came, made promises, lived up to those promises, took action, brought the aircraft carriers and other support in immediately, is just, beyond anything that we've ever really experienced from the United States. It's everyone appreciates him. I will give a disclaimer. I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes. I am one of the people who, for the last 10 months, has spent every Saturday night protesting against our present government. And I can tell you that in Israel, there are 3 major television stations. And then there's all kinds of, there's a religious one, and then there's all the usual streaming, you know, you can pay and get the Netflix and all that stuff, but there's the 3 Israeli stations. Unfortunately, they broadcast in Hebrew, because I would tell you that's probably the best place to get news. They've all gone to 24-hour reporting for the last month. All other broadcasting was stopped. And then about a week ago, they reintroduced 2 shows. One, Eretz Nehederet, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a satire show, because even in times of extreme stress and tension, you need to laugh. And the other show is also a comedy called Zelze. It's something that's been running for years and years, and then the people retired and went on and did other things. And during COVID, they reunited and did special shows throughout COVID. And so now they've started up another series just now. Yeah, Julie, you had a question?
Well, I was just going to say, I would recommend in English, the Times of Israel. I think that gives very good, reliable coverage that you can read. And that's Yossi Klein. I think it was Yossi Klein only wrote it. No, David Horowitz, this guy who write for it. But anyway, the coverage is good. You can, and also you can look at it free, although you can contribute. I personally also subscribe to haaretz.com, which is a more like left-leaning paper, but I feel, you know, I find they're very reliable and different points of view.
Yeah, actually from the digital print. If you look at ynetnews.com, that's the leading newspaper, and they keep their English site pretty much up, and they're pretty reliable also.
Yeah.
I read their Hebrew. That's where I get most of my when I'm not trying to pull myself away from the TV. I mean, we've all spent way too many hours watching. My husband and I have this running joke that whenever you have this kind of an event, like we see it like when they're waiting for a big hurricane or something, and they're broadcasting all the time, but they've run out of things to talk about. So then they start interviewing other journalists. So we actually just saw something here where they started interviewing the journalists who've been going in, and it's like, okay, you know, they're running out of stories, but what they haven't run out of, I mean, every day, several times throughout the day, they focus on the stories of those who have been killed, or some of the heroics stories that you hear of people who put themselves on the line to help others. And they've really been focusing on those stories. And I'm someone who believes that everybody has a story that's worth hearing. I always, on Holocaust Remembrance Day, listening to all the stories on the TV and stuff, I think everyone has something that we can learn from. And anyway, so they've done a lot of that on the television. And Israel, when a soldier is killed, the national news and on the television, every soldier is named, where they're from, how old they are, etc. And you begin to feel like you know these soldiers. So there have been 5 from every kibbutz or moshav in Israel belongs to a regional council, which is kind of like I guess a county. It provides all those types of services that a county would provide. So we belong to a regional council called Mizgav, and there's 30 communities, 6 of which are Bedouin villages, and the rest are Jewish communities. and the kids all go to school together, etc. And so we had one girl who was killed at the music festival, and we've had 5 soldiers killed, and we have 5 kidnapped. Someone from the music festival and a family of 4 who was visiting family at Kibbutz Be'eri, parents and 2 small children. So yeah, it's and I didn't know them personally, but you know, they're from our broader community. It's like, I guess, the equivalent of someone from Delaware, you know, or
Sussex
you know,
County.
that yeah, you
Or even
feel
just
it can,
lower Delaware.
yeah.
Thank you. Marilyn has a question. Unmute Marilyn there. Okay.
Okay, so how are the people in Israel and the people around you reacting to the pressures for Israel to declare a ceasefire?
Most people think that we should ignore it unless it involves releasing the hostages. I mean, it's clear that we're working on with a stopper in hand, and that eventually the world's going to totally turn on us and say you have to stop. Our biggest problem, one of our biggest problems, is the fact that Hamas uses citizens as shields. They're launching rockets from hospital roofs. Their headquarters is under Shifa Hospital, which is the biggest hospital in Gaza. They, you know, there's all this thing about Israel and the siege and not letting fuel in. It's rumored that they have thousands and thousands of gallons of fuel in those tunnels right underneath the hospital. Some of it siphoned from the hospital. We're playing with someone who has a totally different set of rules in the West. And yes, it breaks my heart when I see Palestinian families losing their homes, their children. Not all of them are associated with the Hamas. The Hamas has basically taken over the whole Gaza Strip and abuse these families. I mean, it's kind of think Iran or think Afghanistan. You know, not everybody there. You see that there's people protesting here. They can't afford to protest, but they certainly don't all agree. That doesn't mean that they support Israel, but they certainly aren't all happy with Hamas. So yes, I am sad, but I think right now Israel has its own responsibility. Hamas blatantly says part of their goal is to wipe out the state of Israel. We just can't live with neighbors like that. And you know, we've stopped short too many times, and this time have to finish the job. It's kind of like in 91, Bush Sr. went into Iraq and didn't finish the job. And, you know, later had, which is also a little controversial, but anyway, you have one of the biggest problems here is we also don't know what the end game is. I think of, I have a friend from Iran who, you know, the elite there, the academic elite, helped bring down the Shah. They demonstrated and helped bring him down without thinking of what's going to fill the vacuum. And when Ayatollah filled the vacuum, their position, they actually were in much worse condition or shape than they were before under the Shah. So that is one of my fears, is if we bring down the Hamas, who's going to fill the vacuum? We might destroy them as a political entity, but their ideology is strong and has a lot of support from Iran. And we won't necessarily end up with something better. When we went into Lebanon in 1982, we were fighting a different Palestinian group that had basically taken over southern Lebanon and kicked the Lebanese, most of the Lebanese themselves out. And when we went in, actually some of the Lebanese welcomed the Israeli soldiers. And unfortunately, we outstayed our welcome, and that gave rise to the Hezbollah. So, you know, sometimes you achieve one goal and you create new problems. That is a worry for me.
I think there was a question in the chat from Irene. Do the Palestinians blame Hamas for their plight, or are they focus only on Israel? I think you have, sounds like you've answered a lot of that.
I don't know how much you know about the history of Gaza itself. Israel actually tried to give part of the Gaza Strip to Egypt as part of the Camp David peace agreement. When we gave back the Sinai, we said, here, take Gaza. Egypt wanted nothing to do with it. It was ruled for a very long time by the Palestinian Authority. And the United States, this is one of their mistakes, for which they repeated during the Arab Spring as well, said, oh, they need to have free elections. Now, the Palestinian Authority is known to be rather corrupt. It's one of these things where the leaders skim a lot of public money into their personal bank accounts, and while the people suffer. And so the people were very unhappy with the Palestinian Authority. And when it was decided they were going to be allowed to have free elections, Hamas was actually elected. They then had a little mini civil war in which they literally threw some members of the Palestinian Authority off of roofs. A lot of them were killed, and they were chased out of Gaza. And Hamas at that point started to rule with an iron fist. So, you know, again, they're looking back at some of the Arabs who are speaking up here in Israel, including some of our immediate neighbors. They feel like Hamas doesn't necessarily represent what they feel is the true Islam. Hamas is Shiite, like Iran, very militarized, like ISIS. I mean, what can I say? And part of their platform is to wipe out Israel. I think there are a lot of the Arabs living in Israel who have Israeli citizenship, who do identify as Palestinian, but they recognize the benefits that they have by living in Israel. Benefits like Social Security, benefits like the odds of them waking up in their own beds are much higher. They don't have than if they lived in the Palestinian Authority. They have certain protections that they wouldn't necessarily have. And so I think it's you can't 100% generalize, just like you can't say the United States Jews believe, because you have those that are you know, strong Democrats, you have those that support Trump, and it's kind of hard to generalize, and it's the same, but do they all support Hamas? Definitely not. Yeah. I think you're on mute.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Basically the following. Do you think honestly that a two-state solution can work if Gaza is included within those the Arab, if you will, or the non-Israel state?
That's a tough question. If Hamas is still in control of Gaza, the answer is no.
Yeah,
If the Palestinian Authority were in charge of Gaza, I do believe that a two-state solution is the only solution. However, I don't know that I don't know that a Palestinian state is viable. One, because it is divided into two areas, and the only way they don't have contiguous land. The only way that they can have contiguous land is for Israel not to. That's something I've never been able to wrap my head around and say, how do we solve this problem? And the other problem I have to say, as and again here my own political bias is coming in, Israel has made it almost virtually impossible to have a two-state solution because of the heavy settlement activity in the West Bank, including the illegal settlements that Israel has never had the nerve or the ability to dismantle. When they have dismantled them, they've often been rebuilt. And right now we have we have a handful of ministers right now that are taking advantage of what's going on in Gaza to be pushing their agenda in the West Bank. Well, quick, no one's looking. Let's have a land grab. So I think we've made it impossible.
Yeah,
which breaks my heart. But
yeah, it breaks mine also. I mean, right now I'm reading the news today. The Israeli IDF have clearly made it clear that they've severed Gaza into two pieces. This was written about several days ago as being the potential wartime solution for them in order to shorten the war and to reduce the number of casualties. Is basically isolate Hamas in the north and let the south be. Now, short of having Hamas build a whole bunch of tunnels, or somebody a whole bunch of tunnels between the West Bank and Gaza, I don't see that either. But on the other hand, we did have back in 2005 or 2004, Gaza was given back to the Palestinians, in quote.
2005.
Many settlers were removed from Gaza and resettled in Israel.
There was no Israeli presence left after 2005.
Right, they were all removed, and there were a lot of them. They were all removed and resettled. It occurs to me there's a potential here. I have no idea whether it's at all feasible, of doing the same in the West Bank and using that abandoned housing for the South Gazans.
And then I can tell you, it'll never happen. One, we're talking about many more Israelis living in the West Bank than ever lived in Gaza. And there are too many Messianic Jews who would go to civil war before they would give up the West Bank.
Well, it would be interesting if they were given that choice. So that you want to stay in what becomes the new Palestine. You stay in the new Palestine, it will be run by the Palestinians. You will not be protected by Israel.
Hey, I'd love to see that, but I don't think it'll ever happen.
Okay, it may not, but ever is a long time. I find it amazing 75 years on that people still reclaim or are claiming property rights in Israel. But then again, Jews are claiming artistic art rights among the museums in this country from art stolen from the Jews. So what's a long time?
Thanks for all the questions. I'm glad everyone's participated avidly. Sue, do you have anything you want to wrap up with? Anything you still wanted to share?
I don't
We-
know, I think,
We've had, we are, promoting along with other congregations around the country, around Delaware and around the country, the Israel Emergency Fund of the Jewish Federations of North America, which is aiming to raise $500 million to assist with social service needs, rebuilding, trauma therapy and so on. But in addition to that, I don't know, are there any funds you want people to know about or?
oh, actually, yeah, there is one thing I should sum up with, and you've read this, you've heard me say this a lot, Julie.
Okay.
I mentioned that I've been very involved with the protest movement over the last 10 months. The movement itself was actually a number of grassroots organizations that kind of have an umbrella over them. All different groups coming from different areas that all had a common goal of fighting to keep Israel a democratic country. So on October 7th, these groups had become very well organized with a wide volunteer structure that had an excellent communication set up, because they were used to putting out a notice. This minister, Ben Gvir, was just cited at this Bait Cafe, coffee shop, and suddenly hundreds of protesters would show up. I mean, they knew how to mobilize quickly, and they turned this infrastructure and this great body of volunteers to providing the services the government has so far failed to provide. From in the very early days, escorting people under fire back to their houses to try and pull out important documents and whatnot, helping keeping farms running, providing food, clothing, and whatnot for the evacuees, helping set up daycares and educational and psychological counseling. All these things were being done by volunteers, largely, not entirely, but largely through the protest groups, while the government was just missing in action. Part of it is because one of the things that this government has done over the last 10 months was remove a lot of the executive directors from the different ministries, the professionals who had been running these ministries, and replace them with party hacks. And the party hacks didn't even know what their ministries were supposed to be doing. They didn't know what their responsibilities were. They didn't have the skills and the knowledge to do anything. They were totally missing in action for the first few weeks. They're just now starting to get organized. Whereas all these volunteers have basically been providing the answers, the very highly needed answers. So that said, I mean, I have my 3 favorite charities, and only 2 of them actually can you have sites up in English. The third one is Brothers in Arms, which you might have seen. They were actually one of the controversial ones. All these soldiers who were protesting and that were, the anarchists who are now the ones out fighting the war. So a lot of them, they actually, it works really well. So they're, in Hebrew, they're called Achim L'Neshek, and they are now one of the groups that's very involved in keeping various farms on the kibbutzim that have been evacuated, or other farmers in close by areas that have lost all of their workers, either because they were Palestinian workers who can't get it anymore, Thai workers who fled. There are at least a dozen Thai migrant workers being held hostage, or because they're all off in reserve duty. So this group has, in Hebrew, they very playfully changed their name to Achim LaMeshek, Meshek being a farm. And it works out actually in English as well, because brothers in arms, and now they're brothers on the farms. But they don't have an English site, so I can't, unless you can manage the Hebrew. So my two favorite, the umbrella group that has been running it with the Chofshi B'Artseinu slogan throughout the demonstrations. They have a site. And the other one is a women's group. It was actually started about 3 years ago following a gang rape. A woman set up this organization to fight for women's rights. And they became very active. You might have seen pictures from some of the Israel demonstrations of the women in the handmaidens costumes. So they're the group behind that. And they've pushed a lot of women's issues, violence against women, etc., knowing that if the present government's efforts to gut the Supreme Court were to pass, women would be among the first groups to suffer. So anyway, they've been very, very involved in volunteering over the last 4 weeks. In many
Is that
different
Bonot
areas.
Alternativa?
Yeah, that's Bonot
Okay, I'm putting that in
Alternativa.
the chat. And what was the other name of the other group? Not the Achim LaMeshek, but the other group?
Well, right now they just call it the emergency fund. I can.
Okay, well, the Bonot Alternativa, I know I made a donation.
I think I sent you two URLs.
Yes.
So that the other one.
So the Bonot Alternativa was easier to use to donate. I made a donation in your honor, so there you go. See if I can find the other one and put it in, and I guess we'll start finishing up. Let's see if I have it handy.
If not, let me see if I can pull it up real quick.
Yeah, you did emergency situation. It's called here.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not their site isn't as polished because they threw it together very quickly.
Okay.
I mean, it was up within 24 hours.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to put that
8th,
in.
they already.
And we can put them also in the notes when we put this online. Anyway, Sue, I thank you so much. You know, I've admired you so much for so many years and what all the things you've dedicated your life to. And I'm so honored to be your friend and still to hear from you. And I'm glad our community could hear from you, and more will be hearing when they hear the recording. So I wanted to start with to conclude with a prayer. Let me just get it ready. It's actually a modern prayer for Israel that people can join in if they want. Okay, this is from the American Jewish Congress, American Jewish Committee. I'm sorry, AJC. All right, can people see that? Yes, do you see it on the screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So feel free to maybe read it on mute with me or just read it. You can watch as I read it. To our Israeli brothers and sisters, we express the words of Psalms. Imo anochi b'tzara, we are with you in your crisis. It is our crisis. We mourn our dead of unfathomable numbers, the young, the old, men, women, and children who were murdered by barbaric terrorists, and Israel's courageous soldiers who've fallen in defense of the state of Israel and its people, in defense of all of us, wherever we may be. All on Kiddush Hashem, in sanctification of God's name. Yehi zichram baruch. May our memory of them be for a blessing. We offer nichumim, comfort to the avelim, our mourners, whose losses are incalculable, whose lives have been inalterably scarred. We pray for refuah shlema, refuat nefesh, refuat guf, a full and speedy recovery for all of the wounded in body and soul. We long for the ne'edarim, are missing. May they be found. We will not rest until the shvuyim are abducted, are released, and returned to their loving families. We are grateful for the many beyond the Jewish community who have stood at Israel's side in its great moment of need. dear God, be our partners, Rofei Cholim, a healer of the stricken, Menachem Avelim, comforter of the mourners, Matir Asurim, a liberator of the captives. And in our community and many others, we pray for all the innocent people in Gaza who are also caught up in this conflict and victims of this terrorist regime. And may we look forward somehow to a more peaceful future. And we'll conclude with these words of the Hatikva. Od lo avda tikvatenu, our hope is not lost. Liot am chavshi be'artzenu, we will be a free people in our land. Adonai oz le'amo yiten, God strengthen your people Israel. Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. God bless your people with shalom, with peace, and let us all say, Amen.
Amen.
And I would like to also put that in the chat if anyone wants to save it. I'll have it in the chat. Okay. So thank you all. Really, thank you for coming, and thank you, Sue. And please stay safe, everyone. Hope everyone in your community will just stay safe, and all those that are serving their country come home safely and safe and sound.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.